Well, welcome back to Max Nave Horsemanship again. And well, yeah, I know I said I might not do any more videos, but I just can't help myself. I like to share. And this actually cost me money because I just bought another cord to connect my audio receiver to the camera. Cost me money. All this is out of my own pocket. I get nothing for doing this. In fact, it's costing me money. But I want to follow up to my last video. I got my shedding comb out and I'm just going to go just brush the horses. Well, I do a little more than that, actually. I mean, you might think, well, you're not really doing any training, you're just brushing the horses. But in a way I am. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about shedding and some of the theories behind it, why they do it, when they do it, and some studies that have been done that, well, I think were rather flawed, actually, and I'll explain why I think that. See, in the one study that I'm aware of, and it echoes what I've heard a lot of people say to me, is that horses shed based on sunlight. And I don't believe that's true because the longest day of the year, or no, sorry, the shortest day of the year is actually December 21st. From that point on, the days get longer, and yet the coldest months of the year are actually after that. Typically, not always, it can vary a little bit, but typically January and February are the coldest months of the years. If the horses started shedding out in December, as the days started getting longer, well, they'd end up losing their winter coat when they need it the most. So from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense that that's how it works. Now, it's one of those phenomena that I'm not sure anybody really has a good explanation for, because it's just one of those things that horses just do it, and I've never really questioned it. They seem to know what they're doing and when to do it and why and how much and all that stuff. So I don't worry about it too much. They know what they're doing. So I don't worry about what they're doing. I'm going to take my shedding comb and I'm going to go brush them in a minute here. Before I go brush them, I'm going to explain a little more about this study. And kind of how it was done. There may be more than one, but this is one I'm aware of, and I think they made a lot of mistakes in it. Although, give them credit, their heart was in the right place, and they did the best they could, and because they had a theory, and these people were curious, so they tried something, and well, honestly, I don't think it was right. But I'll explain why. Is what they did was they took a group of horses, a dozen, I don't know the exact number, but they split it in half. Half of them were in an unlit barn. They kept them indoors, which I wouldn't agree with that in the first place, but that's another subject altogether. The other half were outside where they would get sunlight, right? So their theory was that horses shed based on sunlight. And the way they concluded this was the horses that were kept in the dark, because they didn't even turn on barn lights. They had them in the dark in the barn, and the other group was outside in the sunlight. And the group that was outside started shedding before the other group. So they came up with the theory that, well, actually they already had the theory, but that validated what they believed, that the sunlight was affecting them. Now, there's a couple of theories that I have as to why that happened. And it had nothing to do with the daylight, because a number of factors that they didn't include was the activity of the horses and the fact that depending on the color of the horse, particularly darker color horses, are going to absorb more heat from the sunlight, and therefore they are going to want to shed out sooner because they don't really need the winter coat because, well, they're getting the heat from the sun through the color of their coat. And, well, they're also exposed to more sun, and so they get that solar heating all the time anyhow. Plus, the ones that are outside are a little more active. And if they're running around, they generate more heat. And again, they don't need that winter coat as badly. The ones that are kept inside aren't moving around near as much, if at all. And, well, they're going to need a little more coat on them to stay warm because they're not as active. Plus, they're not exposed to the radiant heat of the sun. So there's actually a couple of factors right there that would flaw that study. And then there's one I came up with that I've seen personally too that actually would go the other way around and encourage their beliefs, because well, actually it should have gone, things should have been a little different, because I noticed one time, I walked into a barn where I had several horses years ago, and the doors were wide open into the pasture, and it was basically a large shelter is what it was being used for. And there was one day when it was significantly cold. I walked in there, and there was a half a dozen horses standing in there. And as soon as I walked in, even with the big doors wide open, I noticed there was a significant change in temperature, just from the body heat of the horses being in there. You could, the radiant heat coming off of those horses warmed that barn up. So, you know, there's a variant there that they didn't take into consideration, although that would have worked in their favor, because, no, actually that would have worked the other way around. Anyhow, but it didn't for some reason, I don't know why. And again, I think it had to do with the radiant heat of the sun and the fact they were more active outside. So anyhow, bottom line is, don't always believe what you hear, even if it's backed up with a study or something like that, because there might be more to the picture. And I've noticed a couple of studies where they also kind of lined up with what I believed, but at the same time, I started looking at what they did, and it wasn't accurate. So be careful what you believe. It's not always true, because especially in this day and age of the internet, anybody can post something on the internet and say, hey, this is a fact. And in fact, it actually is just nothing but an opinion. And those opinions aren't always accurate. And sometimes the information is absolutely false and just made up. And I fell victim to that one once years ago. I came across a study that validated what I believed already. And it was so well done that I figured, yeah, it's got to be true. This article was very well written. They quoted a study that, in fact, had never even been done. They quoted a bunch of doctors that, in fact, didn't even exist. But they did the whole thing in such an elaborate fashion that I was fooled into believing that, well, this has got to be true, until I found out later on, no, it was all made up. And that was a perfect example of what you might find on the internet. Even if you look at it and it looks pretty legit, might not be. So be careful what you believe, because not everything's accurate, and sometimes a little experience and some common sense says, no, this is wrong. Sometimes you got to dig really deep to find out whether or not it's true or not. Information isn't always 100%, and that's why I always caution people with my own videos is what I am telling you is from my experience, and my experience is based on what I know, how I do things, the horses I'm working with, the facilities I have, and there's a lot of variables. And what I do might not be what you have to do. You might have to do something different, and it might be based on an article that I don't agree with. But in fact, on some of them, is where I got to elaborate a little bit more yet too, on some of the studies that are done, is, well, maybe they're not even studies, but they're based on opinion. That somebody will say, you should do this a certain way to achieve these results. And they might actually be, in fact, sort of right, because it worked with their horse. But it might not work with yours or mine or anybody else's. That might be, you know, that 1 in 100 that it works with. But because it worked for them, they think it's got to be right. So they will do a video and say, hey, this is how you got to do this stuff. You got to be very careful about those ones. They might not be wrong. They might actually be right for them and their horse and their facilities. But it might be wrong for most of you, or me even. But, you know, sometimes there's things that, well, I'm going to talk about another one I came across. And this is another perfect example of there's more than one right way to do things. Now, there was a particular method that I used that I have shown you. I've actually described how to do it and everything else, and it works very well, and it works 99.9% of the time for me. But years ago, I did come across one horse that it didn't work with. And I was getting rather frustrated because I'd used a tried and proven method, and it wasn't working. And right about that time, I happened to watch somebody else's video, because I watch a lot of other videos because I'm always trying to learn new things. And he did something similar to what I did, but he did it differently. And at that point I thought, you know what? I got nothing to lose. I'm going to try this. It was the one and only time I ever used that particular method, but it actually worked. It worked with that particular horse. And I was kind of excited about that and the fact that it did work. So I've not used it since. I haven't shown that one to you, but it's very similar to the things I do. And I looked at it and I thought, well, there's really nothing wrong with what he's doing. And it's not the same as what I do, but what the heck, let's give it a try. It turned out it worked. And occasionally, you know, like I said, that was a 1 in 100 horses it didn't work with. And that may happen to you. You may have that 1 in 100 horse where the methods that I show you don't work, and you might actually have to try something different. So always be open-minded to other methods and techniques. There might be something that you got to do just a little different, and sometimes maybe you'll figure it out for yourself. Just use your imagination and some logic and go, well, how can I tweak what I'm doing a little to make it work? And well, that's why I've said many times, you got to be open-minded and you got to be flexible. You got to experiment and see what's going to work for you, because, well, might not always work. So I'm going to go brush these characters, and I'm going to do another video that's going to show you a little bit about what I'm doing and how I'm not just hanging out with the horses doing nothing. We're actually accomplishing something during the process. And you'll notice, if you can see the ones behind me, none of them have got a lead or halter on them. And they're going to stay that way while I'm brushing them. And I'm going to show you why. So stay tuned for that one. Coming up next, there's going to be a video on how you can train, and it doesn't really look like training, but it does work. And in the meantime, have a good day. Go play with your horse, and see you on the next one.